Anyway, the version of it here is that produces this Jerusalem Council that actually comes in Galatians before the some come down from Jerusalem, but it's been reversed probably here in Acts. Unless you're circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. I don't care about that particular doctrine. It just says that's what they were teaching. So after an uproar occurred, and Paul and Barnabas had much discussion with them, they appointed Paul and Barnabas and some others to go up to the apostles and elders, the Presbyterian, interestingly enough, are the elders in Jerusalem, to answer this question. And when they got there, everyone greeted them with great joy, and coming to Jerusalem, they were welcomed gladly by the apostles and the elders. They revealed all that God had done, doing for them. And there were some who were of the sect heresias in Greek. I can read that much Greek myself. You probably can too if you're in a Greek. You can go over and read that in an interlinear. That's why I try to tell you to get yourself an interlinear. For of the heresia of the Pharisees rose up and said, it's only right to circumcise and make them keep the law of Moses. So these are Pharisees in the early church. That's the James party. So their Pharisees means the James party. And so that material in Matthew probably also relates to the James party, our blind guides. And guess what? Here we're talking in this document about the teacher of righteousness. That's just his first column, you know. I mean, it's going to take me hours to go on like this, and I'm going to try to speed up because we'll have a break in a minute. But look at that. We're talking about the first time about the teacher of righteousness, the person we think is the leader of the community. He comes 20 years after this thing happened. Whatever happened. Something maybe bad happened. But anyway. And they were like blind men. But notice also, John preached forgiveness of sin in the wilderness, or what's the word that they use in the New Testament always? Repentance from sin. This document is all about repentance. Repentance from sin. And they knew that they were sinful, or that they were guilty men or sinners. So that is repentance, knowing that you're that, and you'll see more. Later they're called the Shaveh, the penitents in the wilderness. The penitents in the wilderness. And they understood and knew they were guilty men, and they were like, so there's so much in here about, we're going to go out in the wilderness in this document too. These are the land of Damascus, which is a kind of desert wilderness. But here, God considered their works righteousness, because they sought Him with a whole heart. Just take a concordance and see how many times Paul uses the word heart. How he says at one time in Corinthians 2, when he's talking about how some people write their own letters of recommendations, but he said, I don't need any letters of recommendations. Don't remember I told you in the Pseudo-Clementines, the letters of recommendations had to come from James if you were a proper teacher. And the homilies actually says that, I forget how it puts it. I don't have my James book here, but I have it in the introduction to the James book. Unless you have letters from James and your doctrine resembles his, then you should shun any teacher, etc., who does not have these. Well, Paul makes light of this and laughs at the people who write their own recommendations all through Corinthians 2. And he says, you are my letter, that famous, he's brilliant. He's a brilliant rhetorician, a brilliant polemicist. He's answering that. I wish I could do as well at conferences as he does. You are my letter, written in letters upon your hearts, not on stone like the Ten Commandments, but on your hearts. And that's when he goes on to talk about Moses having a veil over his face, not because he met God in the tent of meeting, because he didn't want the people to know that the light of the law had gone out. But it's such a clever polemics, it just somersaults wildly into extreme ability. But in any case, I think this is the opposite side of the coin here. So, to guide them in the way of his heart, that's what the real teacher of righteousness does, guide them in the way of God's heart. They don't fall into the pit, and they're not blind. And over again, we're going to hear about the guide in some of these works. And now we know why we must say the first and the last. And he's going to go on to talk about the liar who opposes the teacher of righteousness. This first column of the Damascus document is a killer. And he made known to the last generations now. We're in the last generation, last times. What he would do in the last generation to the congregation, in Hebrew, that will mean also assembly or church, of traitors. So here is the word traitors, but used as for those who don't obey the law. Those who are turners aside from the way, who don't follow the way. We know the way is a name for early Christianity in the book of Acts, 3 times used. Felix knew a lot about the way, author of the book of Acts says. Look up way in a concordance, you'll see that. It's the way in the wilderness and the way. And Qumran in the documents, it's the perfect of the way. It's another name for the people in the community. This is the time about which it is written, like a straying heifer, it is will stray. Quote from Hosea. I'm not going to keep following Ramesh here. And when the man of scoffing or jesting, or if you prefer, I don't think scoffing is the right word, but it's the popular word in Qumran studies. Most translations will have it. In fact, if you look up the word in the dictionary, latzon, ish latzon, it's sometimes in colloquial parlance it means comedian, when the joker, when the person you shouldn't take seriously, when the comedian arose. And what did the comedian do? We've just had the righteous teacher. We've just had the way of his heart. We've just had the guide. We've just had the allusion to blindness. We've just had a cause of root of planting. What's the man of lying do? Because later on we hear this is the man of lying. Everyone agrees with that this is the man of lying. Why? Because he poured over Israel the waters of lying. Baptismal waters, perhaps? What kind of waters of lying did he pour over Israel? This is an ideological adversary, as you can see. This is not the wicked priest. Ramesh is like got rocks in his head. If he thinks that I think this is this is the wicked priest. The wicked priest is defined quite accurately in the Habakkuk commentary as responsible for the death of the righteous teacher or the destruction of him. He's an establishment high priest. This is an ideological adversary within the movement who does what? It's described very carefully. Those who don't have a book, you're at a disadvantage.